Let's take a step back and look at 5 years ago. The Paris Agreement was signed in December 2015 with the objective to stabilize climate change below 2 degrees and getting as close as possible to 1.5 degrees compared to pre-industrial times. Such a global objective requires getting to net zero CO2 emissions in the second half of the century, and for most Western economies, that means getting to net zero or carbon neutrality by around 2050. The objective is extremely ambitious, as can be seen on this particular graph. We can see the year 2020 with two types of trajectories. The current trend in orange, which is the trend taken by countries individually within their national contributions, and the trajectory that we should take in blue, the middle blue curve, which is the, let's say, the Paris Agreement aligned trajectory. So if we're waiting 10 more years, which is again the current trend, and start really mitigating climate change in 2030, then we would have to shift to the light blue curve with a very, very steep decrease in global emissions, as can be seen here. So in this context, 5 years after the Paris Agreement, what can be said about the impact of the COVID crisis on global emissions? We can observe it on this graph with the small red dot, which shows that indeed the COVID crisis led to a temporary reduction of emissions by 8% in the first semester of 2020, and thanks to the second and third waves in some countries, probably also 8% by the end of this year. So indeed, it's led to a huge emission reduction, but compared to the required trajectory to get to 1.5 degrees or Paris Agreement aligned trajectory, this is almost nothing, as we would need this kind of effort each year for the next decades to really reach the objectives signed 5 years ago in Paris. However, we can still see three types of common features between the COVID crisis and the climate change problem. First, both crises encompass common exponential dynamics, which means that early action is highly rewarded, as was the case in the COVID crisis for Asian economies. Vietnam, Taiwan, South Korea, China acted very early. On the contrary, late and irresolute action can lead to quasi-collapse, as was the case in the US, UK, or France. That's the problem always with exponential dynamics. Second common feature, second important information that both crises encompass, the radical and rapid structural change needed to face them. And with the COVID crisis, we had an example of radical structural change, which can happen when social mobilization is high. Third common feature, both crises have unequal effects on different types, different categories of the population. And policies to tackle those two crises need to take social inequalities really seriously if they want their policies to be effective and to be accepted, whether health strategies or climate mitigation trajectories. This year was a bit more, let's say, optimistic with regard to the climate agenda. Indeed, the end of this year, we can say that all major developed economies have pledged a carbon neutrality horizon in their national law. It started in June with the UK, followed by China in September, the EU Parliament, Japan, and South Korea in October, and finally, with the US election, most probably in early 2021, the US will follow. However, three types of risks should be emphasized. regarding these carbon neutrality horizons. First, the time inconsistency risk of those long-term pledges. What we can observe is that COVID recovery plans are not yet green, and that because of the financial and economic crisis which followed the health crisis, macroeconomic conditions, partly imposed by IMF on stressed economies, forbid long-term investment strategies for the years to come and even the decade to come, which is highly problematic. Second type of risk, emission offshoring. Even if most developed economies have pledged a carbon neutral horizon objective, we can see that their global footprint will not necessarily be carbon neutral. This is the case for China with the Belt and Road Initiative, where many countries partner in this international initiative of China have both a high emission intensity and receive huge shares of Belt and Road Initiative investments as a share of their total GCF. But the EU Green Deal, the European Union plan to reach carbon neutrality, has the same problem of offshoring emissions, with very high imported deforestation, and this, as we have seen with the COVID crisis, can lead to new pandemics in the future. Third risk with these long-term pledges is the technology over-optimism. Even if we observe fast decrease in renewable costs, whether solar panel costs or battery pack prices, we know that, for example, negative emission technologies remain a huge technical and financial bet today, while they are part of all official scenarios of transition towards a 1.5 degrees horizon.